Hello, welcome to the 2023 Southeast Collaborative Online Conference. My name is Tiffany Hayes. I'm with the South Carolina State Library, and I am your host for this session, Battling Period Poverty. This event is supported through funding from the Library Services and Technology Act through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Please feel free to ask questions or make comments in the chat or to interact with other attendees and the speakers within the Whova app for this presentation. And now I'd like to introduce our presenters, McKenzie Lemhouse and Rebecca Freeman at USC Lancaster. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Freeman, and I'd like to welcome you again to this presentation talking about battling period poverty. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So today we're going to be talking about ongoing work to make menstrual supplies freely available in our college library after noticing a need for discrete resources. And hopefully this will provide some information for librarians from all kinds of libraries. And we will share our experiences from the idea's inception as an in-house Women's History Month project to its development into a campus-wide gender-inclusive initiative. Next slide, please. And our learning objectives for this presentation. So you're going to hear about perspectives from academic librarians and working to address period poverty on our rural campus. And you'll also learn about resources to better understand and address period poverty in your community. So we'll go on to the next slide and introduce ourselves. So as I mentioned, my name is Rebecca Freeman. I have an MLIS from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. I'm the director here at Medford Library, which is part of the University of South Carolina, Lancaster. And I've been here for about 10 years. And it's my interests, research interests and such include providing access to different resources in libraries and making them welcoming spaces. And I'll turn this over to McKenzie for her to introduce herself.
Sure. Like she said, I'm McKenzie Lemhouse. I earned my MLIS from the University of South Carolina in 2020, and I joined the faculty at USC Lancaster in 2021. I am our instruction and outreach librarian, so I'm in charge of programming and instruction efforts at USC Lancaster. I'm also really interested in like very human-centered library services, as well as like LGBT issues. And so I was really excited about the opportunity to work on the project that we are going to share with you today. And because people always ask in my picture, that is my puppy dog, Junebug. She's a celebrity.
So we'll get into kind of what gave us this idea. What was the reason we're doing this? Because when you think, period poverty, you may not think academic libraries. So we were getting inquiries at our circulation desk for menstrual supplies. I actually had a student come up to me and asked if I had anything available. And thankfully, I do have things usually kind of in my desk or in my purse. So I had materials that I could give them. But our campus, we don't have residence halls. So students can't really run across campus for an emergency stash if they get caught unprepared. Also, it's a fairly rural campus. Students may not have a ton of friends on campus, or maybe their friends aren't on campus that day, so they may not have someone they can kind of go to and feel comfortable kind of asking for something. Because, we all know it can be kind of uncomfortable to kind of go up to someone and say, hey, do you have this supply? Is that something that you have access to? And after a couple of these inquiries, we kind of asked ourselves, is this a problem that we can help address? And we know we're the library, but we also provide a lot of resources that are kind of outside of just providing those books. So, is this something that we can actually go and help with and provide, this needed resource? We'll go to the next slide, please. So kind of give you a little bit information about University of South Carolina, Lancaster. We are a rural campus. We have about 1,800 FTE students, and we are also a 2-year campus. So while we do provide resources for 4-year, we are primarily for freshmen and sophomore. We also have a large dual enrollment population. So we have a lot of high schoolers who are commuting from the high school, as well as we do have traditional as well as non-traditional students as well. And we also have a large number of first generation as well as low income or high need students. We'll be talking a little bit about TRIO later, but we do have a really robust TRIO program. And for those that have never worked with TRIO before, they are specifically there to support first generation as well as low income and high need students. On campus, we also have a student food pantry that is heavily utilized. So, we know we have these needs. We know our students have needs. So we just wanted to, help with that. And we have a significant number of people in our community that are experiencing homelessness. I actually was in a meeting earlier today where we were talking about, that is just getting more and more people are becoming homeless, unfortunately, in our area. Now, we can't make any assumptions about our students' home or financial situations, but we know that this is part of our population that we do serve. So we have to assume to some extent that some of our students will be experiencing these. So while we don't know exact numbers, we know that some of our students are homeless or might be experiencing financial situations that make, getting some of these supplies a little harder. Another thing to be aware of is that on our campus, there are some stores that are nearby, but they are across a really busy 4-lane highway that's not really safe to cross. And a lot of our students get dropped off in the morning and get picked up later in the day. So they're on campus with no transportation and no way to get to, stores that might have, the supplies that they need. Okay, so I'm going to pass this on to McKenzie.
Sure. So as Rebecca kind of gave you an overview of our campus and the types of need that we were seeing, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of period poverty. And this might be a topic that is familiar. Some people may have never heard about it. So I'm going to give you a quick definition and then kind of talk about why it matters for this conversation. So period poverty is a term that can mean a lot of different things depending on the context. But in this case, we're going to use the definition that it describes limited access to menstrual supplies or education due to limited socioeconomic circumstances. And that's drawing from the Period Poverty 2022 resource that you'll see later on in our further reading and references. And so this just means that people, because of the situation that they are facing life from, have limited access to, pads, tampons, etc., to like physically manage their period, but also it can mean that they have limited education about periods, about like resources that are available to them, and also like just the actual information about what's happening in their bodies. Sex education tends to include this, but there are gaps and not every education, covers the same information. So it can be kind of a two-pronged issue. And so we were seeking mainly to address the supply issue. That's the most like primary urgent need in this case on our campus. Research has demonstrated that many people are unable to afford these supplies every month. And so that means, menstruation is not a choice. It's not something that, you decide to do. You can't schedule it when it's convenient. And so if you can't afford these supplies to help you, go about your daily life without, making a mess or damaging your clothes or et cetera, that means that you're going to miss school and you're going to miss work. And as we started to dive into the issue, these were all things that we were generally aware of, but we weren't really familiar with the systemic issue of period poverty. We began to see that there were some patterns in the research that was available, and namely being that most of it applied to K-12 libraries or schools, and that there was not a lot of information available regarding period poverty in higher education. I think that it's a fair assumption to say that a lot of researchers, or not researchers, but funding and things like that focuses on young people who don't have control over their situation. And then an assumption is made that young adults who are in college are kind of, they may be working, whatever, they are then more responsible for their situation than, a young child. And we also know, just as a little side note, on top of just attending school, attending work, missing opportunities, period poverty can also negatively impact your physical and mental well-being. If you are, not doing well in school, but also if you just, I'm having a really rough time, you might be dealing with some mental unwellness as well. So once we looked into what period poverty was, and we were looking at kind of the systemic issue and what other people were doing, we kind of conducted our own little tiny literature review, and we knew that we wanted to do something. We entered into a kind of planning phase. We knew we wanted to do something, but we hadn't set up the specifics quite yet. And during this phase, we decided, it just so happened that we were near Women's History Month in March. And so we decided to have a donation drive in honor of Women's History Month. So this was kind of a temporary solution while we worked out a more sustainable approach. So that gave us kind of time to investigate more long-term solutions to this issue on our campus specifically. And so we decided to promote this using flyers, social media, kind of natural, easy word of mouth type of information spreading on campus. And we reached out to our partners on campus. Rebecca mentioned our TRIO office. We also had some student groups that outside of the TRIO office, our Define group, which is like a Young's Women's group on campus, as well as our PRISM group, which is like our LGBT union. And they helped us to collect the materials and, move forward with the logistics of the project. So once we planned it, we started to get the word out. It became time to actually do the thing. So on this slide, you can see some of our donation bins. We literally put wrapping paper around copy paper boxes. We had them and they were big enough to hold, some of the more bulky packaging. And we put some fact sheets that we found online to educate people about what period poverty was. And kind of give an idea of the number of people that it impacted, because this is an issue that is not like super widely discussed. I think a lot of people just kind of make assumptions about, other people's situations, and then, oh, well, somebody else may be taking care of that as well. Surely somebody else is managing this. So we wanted to educate people while we were asking for their help. And so we put these really brightly colored flyers on these boxes with nice shiny wrapping paper to really catch your eye. And we placed them in high foot traffic areas in the library. That meant you can see in the picture right at our book returns. This is right when you walk into Medford Library. It's next to the front door. Any other location in the library, you're going to walk past this donation box. So we really wanted it to catch people's eye. It was also right next to a Women's History Month display and faculty feature. We featured female USCL faculty members' publications right on the counter next to it. We also put it outside of our bathroom. So that photo on the right, there's a small table that has public health flyers, as well as information about our student food pantry. And so it's literally just on a little low-lying landing pad outside of the restrooms. Easy way to drop off these materials in a place that you might associate with the need, right? And so we also partnered with our campus TRIO office to collect these supplies. They also put some bins in their office as well, which is a popular destination on campus. There's lots, they're always having events. People are always walking in, checking out what's going on. And so this was a good place for people to also come in and drop them off if they weren't going into the library. And like I said previously, we continued to promote this on social media, on campus flyers and through word of mouth. And as you will see, we were really overwhelmed by the generosity that was displayed during this drive. So you can see in the picture, we have some plastic bins and they are full of period supplies. Our results were that we were really almost overwhelmed. We received way more supplies than we anticipated, which is a good problem to have. We decided, because we got so much support, to experiment and leave these donation bins out, continue to leave them out over the summer and the fall semester. We updated the signage and just let people to continue to make these consistent small donations. It wasn't anybody bringing in, thousands of tampons. It was, a faculty member coming in, oh, I picked some up for myself this week, so here's some for y'all, and they would drop them in. And so we are still receiving, every now and then we'll continue to get donations, and we are still working through our initial round of donations. There were so many. You can also see in this picture that there are some plastic bins. These were purchased by one of our campus partners as part of like a community wellness grant, very generously supplied. And so we put the materials into these bins on our countertops in the restrooms for a quick, easy, and anonymous way of distributing these supplies. And then we just actually, for a while, they lived in my office. We stored them in my office, but now all of our donated materials have a home in a filing cabinet in the library.
So, it was wonderful, the results that we got from this. But with that, we had some challenges. So as McKenzie mentioned, one of the things we did is that we put it into all of the restrooms. We made a choice to place the bins of period supplies, in not only our women's room, but our men's room as well, which actually led to some staff member complaints that ended up going up the chain. So we did have some complaints, and it wasn't just one person, it was a couple people who, were concerned that these materials were in the men's room and they felt they shouldn't be. And so it was that challenge that we didn't even really think about as a potential. The other thing that came out about was that potentially putting these in the men's room, where, we may have some people who would be using the men's room but might need these supplies, that potentially could out them if they went and grabbed some of those supplies. And that was definitely not our intention, but it wasn't something we had originally thought of. So there was that concern that was made aware to us, we were made aware of that, this potentially is outing some people that we shouldn't be doing. So we did this for the purpose of good, but it didn't work out that way exactly. And then we also had items that would kind of go rogue. So one of the things that we realized is that, collecting these supplies is lovely, and, we're getting a lot of support, but we didn't put them out yet. It didn't mean that people didn't need them. So we would have people actually opening up the supplies while they were still in the donation boxes to make use of them, because obviously that need was there. We just didn't take into account that maybe they needed them a little quicker than we were able to get them out. And then we have also had a slight problem with the distribution bins being emptied or hidden. So, and it may be that, they were trying to help us. They were trying to make sure that all of them were, filled in a different way. Some of them were being removed from the men's room. That was about the time that the complaints were coming in. So they would be removed from the men's room. They would just be moved to the women's room. But those distribution bins were sometimes moving on their own. And then the other thing that we didn't really take into account when we first worked with this wellness grant was that while they could purchase the bins for us, they couldn't cover the menstruation supplies. So we really had to start thinking about what are some other ways of getting reliable source of these materials, because we can't go and just ask for donations all the time. We are going to have to go and make this sustainable. So that was one of the things we didn't really take into consideration when we kind of started this, was while they were able to provide access to certain things like condoms, they weren't able to provide access to the supplies that we were trying to put out. And then for our campus and community wellness groups, they really did assist with purchasing the bins. And I mentioned the condoms. So we had already worked with them to provide free condoms through their grant. So those were already in those restrooms. So we just made a point of putting out the period supplies with them. And that was one of the reasons that we actually decided to put them in the men's room as well, was not only were we aware that we might have some people who might need them, who might use the men's room, but also if we're putting the free condoms out everywhere, we might as well put out the free period supplies. So, and our, like McKenzie mentioned, we worked with Define and Trio to help us collect those supplies. They were a huge help. We also had a lot of groups throughout campus, individual faculty and staff members who we had mentioned that, hey, we're doing this thing, and they were a big help. They would go and get big supply, go and purchase large numbers and bring them in specifically for us. And then the staff complaints about the supplies in the men's room actually led to a conversation that we had been wanting to have about all gender restrooms with administration. So I mentioned that these staff complaints did go up the chain, and we ended up having a conversation with HR and our administration about the potential of having all gender restrooms in the library. We have one staff bathroom that is sort of considered an all gender restroom, but that was it. We just had men's and women's rooms. So this actually led to this additional conversation that we hadn't been having before. I don't know if McKenzie wants to add anything to that.
You pretty much covered it. It was kind of every cloud has its silver lining. Like you said, that complaint really did kind of pave the way for us to have this larger conversation, in part because the staff member specifically said, these shouldn't be in the men's room. You should have them in your all gender restroom. And we realized, this is a single occupancy locking stall, but it's not really for student use. This is our staff restroom. And so we were kind of, that kind of planted the seed, maybe this is a good way to approach this. Yeah.
So our impact. We don't collect student information. That's for privacy concerns. But we have seen that the usage is there. People are using them. And we see that when we restock the bins. We decided to create, we mentioned the all gender restrooms. We did create an all gender restroom on each floor. And I say create, we added a lock to them and a new sign. So it is all gender in the sense that there's the ability to lock them. There are 3 stalls in each of our restrooms. So we do have an all gender restroom that can be used for 1 or more people, but there is that lock. And then we made point of putting those bins in the women's room and the all gender restrooms. So they're in 3 of our restrooms in the library. And we've definitely seen that we're having to restock them. And then the overall campus support has been great. Like we mentioned, those complaints did lead to an all gender restroom installation. We had definitely been thinking about it. It's something that we had been working on. Other groups have been working on campus to kind of create those spaces. But we hadn't yet really talked to administration about it. We hadn't figured out exactly how we wanted to proceed with that. So that complaint definitely led to, an improvement to the library. And it's been, campus has appreciated that we've had these supplies. So I'll pass this on to McKenzie
Sure. So where are we now? I'm going to read from the slide for just a moment, and then I'll talk a little bit extra. So like we said, these supplies are now available in our women's and lockable all gender restrooms. We consistently stock them with donated supplies. I try to stock them every Friday, but if it's not every Friday, it's, regularly. And we put eyes on them as we, make our rounds and we close down the library so we know when they are being emptied. Our self-service bins on the countertop, you can see in this picture, it's simple, but it's direct. This means that our students, or anyone, you don't have to be a student to use it, can take what you need without identifying yourself or outing yourself to staff or other students. This is all anonymous. We do not record, user data. It's open to anyone who uses the library. And so far, we have not had issues with people who are like abusing the system. People really do seem to just be taking what they need and leaving the rest for people who, other people who need it. We do still have to move the occasional rogue bin back into its home, but that's just kind of that's library land. Am I right? One thing that I would like to mention is we did decide, and part of this is, this is what people donated, but we were conscious in the way that we phrased our requests for donations. We only collected disposable period supplies, in part because, they're cheaper, they're easier to access, so it's easier for people to, make that donation, but also because, as we mentioned, we can't make assumptions about our students or our users' home lives. And so we decided that, it's easier to just take a disposable product and be done with it when you're done with it than to use one of these, more sustainable, reusable items, but that requires like a washing machine or running water to use. So that is where we are right now. That's what it looks like right now. And where we are going next is we hope to investigate systemic support, so more long-term sustainable solutions to purchase these materials so that we don't have to continue to rely on donations. We will absolutely accept donations if people are so moved. We are still, as I mentioned earlier, working through the original donated supplies even a year later. We still have a really solid supply, and that I'm looking at the filing cabinet through my window. We still have quite a lot. I was really, really impressed with the spirit of generosity on our campus last year. And we are hoping to have some of our student groups help us to distribute and stock other all-gender restrooms around campus. So hopefully moving this outside of just the library into other all-gender restrooms. So, we have it in our base in the library, but also our students will know this is a resource that they can go to across campus, and they just know to go to the all-gender so that there's not as much, burden on student groups or faculty and staff to restock all of these different restrooms. It's in the set location. I think I spoke out of turn, so I'll let Rebecca add anything if she has anything.
No, I think that definitely, shows where we're going. Doing that, some kind of grant to make sure that we have supplies going forward, so it's not a burden on the campus itself and faculty and staff to supply those materials. One of the things I was realizing when I was looking at the picture from the last slide is actually when we were talking about what we were providing, people are really great about providing all sorts of different levels of what, like tampons and pads, which has been really helpful. But, if we run out of one and we don't have it, we're just providing what we have. So having those additional grant supplied funds would be awesome for the next step in ensuring that, if we need a heavy day, we've got some supplies that people might have. So. Okay, so with our takeaways, we were asked kind of what were some things that you would take away from this? What were some things that you learned, wish you knew? So what worked well? Collecting disposable supplies, as McKenzie mentioned, versus reusable options. It definitely worked for us and our current population that we're serving, because as she mentioned, we can't guarantee that people actually have a way to, clean those reusable options. The disposable ones work really well for us in that someone can just pick it up and use it and they're good. What we found is actually that the tampons are the most popular for us, but that doesn't mean that they're the only ones that are being used. We definitely needed both options because, you never know exactly which one someone might find useful. So we do have tampons as well as pads, and the pads are definitely moving. They're just not necessarily moving as quickly as the tampons. And we're partnering for the partnering with different locations and having those different collection spots was really helpful. And even like telling people that we were collecting. I had a meeting with someone on campus and they were like, oh yeah, before you leave, I went and she had bought a whole bag full of supplies. And I was able to pick that up when I had that meeting with her. So, even just making those connections on campus was really helpful with getting those supplies. And I'm going to pass this on to McKenzie for what would we change?
Sure. And I was very cautious about using the term mistakes. Every misstep is a learning opportunity. So learn from our missteps. So one thing that we would definitely have changed if we knew the way that this was going to work out was we would have liked to have requested our all gender restrooms before taking on this project and placing all of these items in the men's rooms. Obviously, we don't want to distress people. We don't want to make anybody upset. But also we were a bit, I don't want to say embarrassed, but it was not a fun feeling. It made us sad to realize that we were, possibly making some of our students feel like they had to out themselves in a situation where they might be reaching for these materials in the men's rooms. So this is something that I think ideally we would have changed about this process, though of course it, might have slowed things down. There's a give and a take. I think that is definitely one option that we would have altered if we knew how it was going to work out. One other big thing, as Rebecca mentioned earlier in the presentation, people were, just because we were taking the donation didn't mean that people didn't have the need right then. And people were taking, the materials out of the donation bin, which ultimately wasn't a problem. It was getting to the end goal of helping somebody, but we would have definitely started moving those donations out a bit quicker if we had, known what we know now. And then also we would have liked to have started applying for grants at the front end of the project rather than, okay, we've got this momentum going, now we kind of have to do this, right? It's worked out. We were really lucky that our campus was so generous and we have a really solid nest egg of donations amassed until we can get in and apply for some of the grants that we're going to talk about in our resources page in just a moment.
And I'll add, so this doesn't really fall under what worked well / what we would change, but it's kind of a takeaway. One of the things that kind of came up recently for us is when we're going and resupplying our stock, we have a kind of mixed bag for staff. We've got faculty and staff and students, and we have men and women. And one of the things that we realize is that maybe we need to have this discussion with everyone and just make sure that there is a comfort level with actually handling these supplies and making sure that they are getting restocked. Because for many reasons, it does require going into, the women's room to restock them and just making sure that everyone is kind of comfortable with this and kind of seeing where that is. So having that discussion with our faculty and staff and just making sure that they're, and that wasn't something that we really thought about. Even when we were doing the donations, it was just something we kind of thought about later. And it would have been nice to have that conversation beforehand. And then in regards to the gender neutral bathrooms, there's been a bit of a confusion with our gender neutral bathrooms because we did kind of do that on the back end. And I mentioned earlier, literally, we just added a lock to them and a sign. And so there has been a little bit of confusion as to the fact that, yeah, there are 3 stalls in here, but it's a gender neutral bathroom. It can be used for just one person. So kind of putting out a little bit more marketing, kind of informing people this is how it can be used. And even potentially looking at being able to add an additional restroom that maybe is a one-stall bathroom, just kind of for future takeaways.
So we talked about how we planned it, what we did, how we did it, and what we learned. Now for the part that is beneficial to everyone who's watching. We're going to talk just a little bit about ways that other librarians and practitioners might be able to apply a project like this to their own libraries. We are far from experts. We are just sharing our experiences, but here's some helpful resources and ideas that we found really useful as we, did this undertaking at our own library. So first, I would encourage people to not to reinvent the wheel. I can't speak. There's lots of resources out there, and you have lots of partnerships and friends in your networks, regardless of what type of library you are. There was definitely I don't want to say a lack, but there wasn't as much research out there about projects like this in college libraries and higher education, but there definitely were case studies and other resources out there that we were able to read, see what other people were doing, and then kind of learn from their experiences as well. One really helpful resource that will be included in our conference app notes later on, and I will be providing a resources page in just a moment, was the Alliance for Period Supplies interactive map with fact sheets by state. I mentioned earlier on our donation boxes, we had, a flyer saying what we were doing, and then we had a fact sheet that kind of gave data specific to South Carolina, to our area. And this is where we got that. It's really helpful to see, what those numbers are so that you can properly advocate and pitch the idea to stakeholders and to administration and to people who may be donating either, financially or, with physical items. One other really great resource that is out there is external funding. We love external funding when it's not coming from our own pockets. There are grants out there that can help you purchase materials and supplies. Two are listed on the screen. One being Pads Across America, which is, I learned as I investigated it, not just for pads. You can also purchase tampons and other types of supplies. And then resources like periodaction.org. So there are already institutions and procedures in place that can help you get this external funding and support from people who already, you don't have to pitch this idea and sell it to, they know that it matters. I would also encourage anyone listening to check for existing resources in your community. If you're a public library, you might have existing connections with, for example, shelters or, food pantries and other systems like for mutual aid that are already helping to connect people with these resources who can either share their own experiences and lessons, or might be able to help share the actual resources with you. And I would also encourage you to look to your friends, to your networks, whether it's, a friends group, if it's campus partners, if you're on an academic campus, but also to look to, the power of social media, a flyer, and word of mouth. We all know that there are information travels in a lot of different ways. And so definitely make use of all of the different avenues that you have at your disposal. And I am going to jump ahead to further reading. I'll go over a couple of our resources and I'll give Rebecca a chance to chime in as well. And like I said, all of these links and sources that we're mentioning are going to be provided in the conference app. One thing that I mentioned was looking at case studies. This was really helpful as we tried to figure out what was going to be the best fit for our campus and our users. So there's a website called Ontflow, and they do collect case studies. Ontflow also makes available, if you've seen the quarter disposers, that's not the right word, but the little quarter machines mounted on the wall in restrooms where you can purchase tampons. They have a product like that that you can actually mount to the wall, but you don't have to feed it quarters. You just turn the dial and it dispenses free products. These seem to be more popular in like public libraries and school libraries, like K-12 school libraries. But the website also has a lot of information. Those are available for purchase, but you can also look at these free case studies and see what other people are doing. As you saw, our bins are not quite so sophisticated, but they get the job done. But we were really grateful for those case studies so we could see what was working and what wasn't for other people. There were lots of news articles, especially in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure we can all attest to the ways that the situation has forced us to examine that our users and our faculty and staff do not all have the same home lives, and they do not all have the same resources. And so this kind of created more conversations about inequities in a lot of different aspects of life. And so one of those articles that I found intriguing was an NPR. Actually, it's not an article, it was like a podcast episode, but they also had a nice write-up called The Case for Free Tampons and Pads. Another really great resource was the Alliance for Period Products. I mentioned already they have a really handy breakdown, and I just realized this is on my slide twice. Oops. But it's really handy, so that's why it's there twice, right? State by state fact sheets. It's like an interactive map, so you can see and compare, Georgia versus North Carolina, etc. Pads Across America has grants available, but they also have like learning resources available. So as you are, researching the issue, seeing what's the best fit for your institution and possibly pitching it to your administration, that would also be a great resource, as well as period.org, State of the Period. And that's my second instance of Alliance for Period Supplies. How embarrassing. And then we also, because we're librarians, looked for a few academic articles, but as we mentioned, in our case, there was not quite so many pertaining to higher education. So that wasn't an area that we have a ton to recommend to you at this time. And I'll give Rebecca a chance to speak if she would like to expand on anything that I just threw at you.
So I think all of these are really awesome places to get additional information. As McKenzie mentioned with Aunt Flo, and providing those, dispensers on the walls. We're lucky in that we have counter space that we could actually put things up, like put things on the counters, and we didn't have to spend a lot of extra funding for the wall dispensers, but those would be really helpful depending on your space, and even with your users potentially. And all of these kind of give additional information, other places to kind of research, provide information. Even the Title IX and menstruation article, which was fascinating. It is a long article, but it's fascinating, kind of talking about, Title IX. And it wasn't an area that I had really thought about in regards to menstruation. So I think they're all well worth it, no matter what kind of library you're coming out of, or you're in. Kind of looking at these to determine, what's really best for my population, because each population is going to be slightly different. Your patrons are slightly different. What they're going to need might be slightly different. We've thankfully been able to figure out kind of what we need for us. But it may take a little bit of, playing around with things to figure out what's best for you.
And one thing that I would add, I had it in my notes, but I didn't say it. We are at a collaborative conference. One of the biggest resources that you have at your disposal is your friendly neighborhood librarians. I'm actually going to go ahead to the next slide and say, if you have any questions or if you would like any advice, you're absolutely welcome to reach out to myself or Rebecca. We will be in the chat during the presentation to address any questions. But please don't hesitate to reach out if you think this is a project that you might be able to apply at your own institution. I know that both of us would be more than happy to share what worked, what didn't, answer questions, and help you brainstorm.
And if anybody's doing this in your library, we'd love to, kind of know how you're doing it. If there's anything that you're doing that we think we should add to ours, we'd love to hear about it. So definitely, if you're doing this, or if you know somebody that's doing this in their own library, pop that into the chat. We'd love to hear about it.
All right. Thank you so much, Rebecca and McKenzie. We're glad you were here today, and thank you to everyone that attended this session. If you have any further questions, please reach out to our presenters via the conference app, or here's their email. And we will be providing evaluations for each session, so look for that, and we will get your anonymous feedback to our presenters. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much.